well.
Perfectly well.
You are the most exalted.
You are the most exalted
of all learned sages.
of all learned sages.
And you have descended.
And you have descended
for the benefit.
for the benefit
of all human society.
of all human society.
You have come.
You have come
to give spiritual knowledge.
to give spiritual knowledge.
And you are a direct representative.
And you are a direct representative
of Kapila Dev.
of Kapila Dev,
The incarnation of God.
the incarnation of God,
And the plenary portion.
and the plenary portion
of knowledge.
of knowledge.
I am therefore asking you,
I am therefore asking
O
you,
spiritual master,
O spiritual master,
what is the most secure shelter
what is the most secure shelter
in this world?
in this world?
Please hear Prabhupada's wonderful purport. As Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita, Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena taratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktаттamo mataha. Of all yogis, he who abides in me with great faith, worshipping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. Bhagavad Gita 6:47. Jada Bharat was a perfect yogi. He was formerly the Emperor Bharat Maharaj, and he was now the most exalted personality among learned sages and the master of all mystic yogas. Although Jada Bharat was an ordinary living entity, he had inherited all the knowledge given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila Dev. He could therefore be taken as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As confirmed by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his stanzas to the spiritual master, Saksha Dharitvena Samasta Sashtre, an exalted personality like Jada Bharat is as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he fully represents the Lord by giving knowledge to others. Jada Bharat is herein accepted as the direct representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he was imparting knowledge on behalf of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, Maharaj Rahugana concluded that it was appropriate to ask him about Atma Tattva, the spiritual science. Tad vinanartam sa gurum eva vigacchit. This Vedic injunction is also confirmed herein. If anyone is at all interested in knowing the spiritual science, Brahma Jijnasa, he must approach a guru like Jada Bharat. Jai Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
His Grace Manidhar Prabhu is not feeling so good, so I was informed by Tejas Prabhu to look at the class. So if you're wondering why I'm sitting here, then I apologize. This is a nice verse from Bhagavatam which continues the discussion, or rather the questions that are being asked by Maharaj Rahugana after he has met Jada Bharat. We all know that Maharaj Rahugana was not in this mood at all, just maybe a few verses in the chapter ago. In fact, Rahugana was quite insulting in the way he was treating Jada Bharat. But Jada Bharat, like a true devotee of the Lord, did not counteract. The great devotees of the Lord, their nature is never to counteract. That is why they can freely distribute transcendental knowledge. The moment these devotees do not counteract, they become very much connected to Krishna. That is why it is stated that the best counteraction in this material world is no counteraction. If you read 1:1848 of Srimad Bhagavatam, Parikshit Maharaj says very nicely that the great devotees of the Lord are sometimes defamed, they are sometimes cheated, they are sometimes cast into illusion, they are sometimes criticized and sometimes even killed. But despite all these difficulties that the great devotees go through, nasyat tat pratipurvanti, na asyat tat pratipurvanti, they do not counteract. And because the great devotees of the Lord do not counteract, they actually give nice association to the living entities. If they were to counteract also, then this material energy would just be passing between one entity to the other. And in the end, both parties will never be peaceful. So Vaishnava relationships are defined by no counteraction. Instead, it is defined by passing of transcendental knowledge, sharing of transcendental knowledge. That is why after Rahugana spoke harsh words, Jada Bharat answered on the basis of transcendental knowledge. He did not argue like a lawyer would. He did not argue like what we would normally do. We would always have some kind of reaction. But he quoted Shastra and he spoke Shastra. And because he spoke Bhagavatam back to King Rahugana, you find that Rahugana's entire disposition changes in this chapter. Why? Because he's becoming purified by the transcendental association of Jalabanat. This is the impact that a great devotee has on the living entity. And that is why now you find that actually in this verse, Jalabanat has, or rather King Rahugana in this verse, has actually become alive. Up to the point where he was chastising Jalabanat, he was actually dead to spiritual life. But here you find that we actually become awakened when we start accepting and being submissive to the great devotees of the Lord. This entire verse is a big change. Rahugana now is glorifying an exalted devotee. From criticism, he has now reached the point of glorification. And this is the greatness of association. There is that nice verse. What is that verse? It is in 3rd canto, 25th chapter, 25th verse, 325-25. Yes, Prabhu. Satam prasangam mama virya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana katha tajoshanana shuvapavargavatmani shraddharati bhakti anukramishyati. This verse actually describes what is happening now to King Rahugana, because he has now come in the association of a pure devotee. And because he has come into association of a great exalted devotee, now what happens to him is, his heart is now becoming very pleasing. It is becoming satisfied. Because Rahugana is speaking transcendental knowledge, and now he will speak the glories and the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the verse tells us very nicely that when one is in the association of pure devotees, then the pastimes of the Lord, they become very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and to the heart. To Karna, the ear, and to Hrit, the heart. And not only is it pleasing, but when we come in contact with great devotees of the Lord, something else happens. By cultivating that knowledge of actually being in the association of devotees and hearing from them, Bhagavatam tells us that the living entity gradually becomes advanced in the path of liberation. And as it becomes advanced in the path of liberation, then he becomes freed from the material nature and the formalities of the material world. And because he becomes freed from that, he then becomes fixed in his attention at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Only when we have attention to Krishna can we develop attraction to him. This is an important point in devotional service. 2A's. This is stated by Kunti Mata in the 1st canto, 18th chapter, I think on the 42nd verse. She says very nicely in that verse that Tvayime Ananya Vishaya. She is praying to Krishna. Ananya means, Krishna, let me be so much focused on your devotional service and lotus feet that I should have nothing else in my mind, Ananya, except you. And she says that if Tvaime Ananya Vishaya, then she says, Mati Madhupati Asakrit. Let my mind, Matihi, let my attention be constantly fixed at your lotus feet. And because there is Matihi on Krishna, in the 3rd line of Bhagavatam, that verse, she then says, Ratim Udvahatat Addaha. Because I am fixed at your lotus feet, therefore let me become attracted to you. That is why the Vaishnavas tell us, until we become attentive to the words of great devotees, it is very hard to become attracted to Krishna. We are always running after this idea, when will I be attracted to chanting? In the morning, chanting can sometimes be very relishing, but after the first hour passes, or maybe after 45 minutes passes, it can become a bit of a drag. And every time we are thinking in our hearts, when will I have that attraction where I don't even see the time and I'm just chanting and chanting? That is attraction. But before that comes, Kunti Mata correctly says, be attentive to Krishna. Just like in school. If a student is attentive in a class, chances are he becomes attracted to that subject. The result of that is he does well. But if he's not attentive in class, how can he become attracted? And therefore, how can he do well in the subject? This is the beautiful psychology of Bhagavatam. So this is what is happening to Rahugana. He has now heard from the lips of a pure devotee this great Sashvik knowledge. And now being touched by him, it has become pleasing and satisfying to his ears. Unknown to him, this knowledge is gradually making him advance. And Bhagavatam 3:25 says, when he becomes freed and his attention is fixed, then there is attraction. And then at the end of that, real devotion and devotional service begin. So this is the process that is being shown to us by the exchange of these two personalities. Prabhupada makes it a point in the purport to actually focus on the greatness of Jadabharat. And he says that because Jadabharat is considered to be a great yogi, he is considered a yogi because he is a great devotee. He is fixed at the lotus feet of Krishna and he is worshipping him in transcendental divine service. And Prabhupada makes it a point to say that even though Jadabharat appeared to be an ordinary living entity, because he was transmitting the message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he has become a transparent biomedium. This is actually the qualification of a great devotee of God. That is why our Shastras tell us very nicely, I think in 434 Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, Krishna says very nicely to Arjuna, that you please first of all just try to learn the truth by approaching Guru. Tad vidhi pranipatena. Pariprashnena sevaya. Upadekshantite jnanam jnanivas tattvadarshinaha. This verse in 434 is very much related to this verse today, because it is telling us how we should actually approach a great devotee. So two things come out from Krishna's transcendental lips. One is, you please try to learn the truth. And that is what King Rahugana is going to do. After he glorifies the great devotee Jadabharat in 4-5 lines, in the last line, he now begins to inquire. And the first question he asks is very nice. He says, I am therefore asking you, O spiritual master, what is the most secure shelter in this world? This is a question we should all be asking. This is the reason why we are here. The most secure shelter we have is right where we are. This is the most secure shelter. Anything outside of this shelter is never secure. So Jadabharat is very pleased now. Rahugana is asking the right question. Why? Because he's following the principle of 434. He has now tried to learn the truth by approaching Jadabharat. He glorifies him as a direct representative of the Lord. And Prabhupada states that Jadabharat is as good as the Lord in his plenary portion as Kapila Dev. Because all the principles of Sankhya Yoga that you will read in the 3rd canto of Bhagavatam is actually very nicely summarized now in the next 2-3 chapters by Jadabharat. Hence his connection with Kapila Dev. So this is why Prabhupada writes in the purport specifically why Jadabharat is considered to be the representative of the Lord in his form as Kapila Dev. So the verse tells us, you please learn the truth by approaching Guru. How? We must inquire from him submissively. Rahugana at the beginning was kicking and chastising Jadabharat. So how could he receive knowledge? When one's head is in the sky, he is never going to be submissive. But once he becomes submissive, then the Guru becomes satisfied. So the first principle we must understand from this verse is the principle of submission. And that is what Krishna is telling Arjuna. Please inquire from the great spiritual master, the great devotee, submissively. And this submission in Shastras is very nicely shown. If you read the pastimes of Lord Parashuram, who is none other than Krishna, you will find there's a very nice episode that shows the extent of his submission. Parashuram had gone to the forest to gather wood, and he had his 4 brothers who were actually in the cottage with his father Jamadagni. His mother Renuka had gone to fetch water from the lake, and after fetching water she comes back and gives it to the husband. Jamadagni is a great sage, and he has great vision. The moment he sees his wife, he could understand that while Renuka was actually fetching water from the lake, a very beautiful looking being known as Gandharva, he was passing by the lake. And Renuka had actually seen this Gandharva, and she had remarked to herself in her heart, what a wonderful looking being. So Jamadagni became upset, and he said that, my dear wife, you have now become unchaste, because your mind has rested for a moment on the beauty of another man. My spiritual master says if Jamadagni had lived in Kali Yuga, then he would be appalled. Because if this was the standard of chastity, then we all finished in Kali Yuga. So anyway, Renuka now has become the subject of the wrath of her husband. So he summons his 4 sons who are in the hermitage and says, you have accepted me as your father and I am also your spiritual master. Your mother has committed a grave crime, a sinful act. Now you must obey me and you must do something for me. Are you ready? So the sons say, my dear father, you are our spiritual master as well as our father. Please tell us, and we will submissively obey. So Jamadagni says, please chop off the head of your mother. Immediately now. So the sons say, Father, we are submissive, but must we really do this? Is it necessary? And Jamadagni then gets so angry that he turns his sons into stone. At that point, Parshuram comes back to the hermitage and he sees a terrible scene. His mother is crying on her knees. Jamadagni is looking very upset. And what looks like his brothers have now turned to stone. So he turns to his father and says, my dear father, please tell me what has happened. Jamadagni says, my dear son, are you ready to obey me? And Parshuram says, you are my preceptor. I am ready to obey you. Please tell me what I should do. Your mother has performed these actions. Therefore, you must chop off her head. Parshuram, without even a question, takes out his axe and chops off the head of his mother, clean. And then he bows at the lotus feet of his father. Jamadagni becomes very pleased. And he says, I have become so pleased with you and your obedience and your submission that I now give you 2 boons. Ask me what you want. And Parshuram says, my first boon is, please bring my brothers back to life. And my second boon is, please bring my mother back to life. And when he does that, Jamadagni becomes very pleased. So the Shastras tell us that when one is in the presence of a great personality, the extent of submission that we should have to a bona fide devotee and representative of the Lord actually determines the extent of knowledge that we receive. This is very important. We should not surrender to a bogus guru. And how would we know if a guru is bogus or bona fide? Again, Prabhupada gave this nice example. He said that guru is to be understood by his practice and his preaching. They should be in line. If a guru cannot practice what he is preaching, he has no potency to transmit transcendental knowledge. That is the science of Bhakti. Prabhupada gave this example in one of his conversations. He said that one time there was a boy who was very addicted to sweets. So his mother was worried about him. And she brings him to this guru in the ashram. And she tells her, Maharaj, please, take care of this boy. Get him to get rid of his addiction to sweets. So Guru says, he thinks about it and says, all right, bring him back in 2 weeks. So mother goes back, comes back in 2 weeks, leaves the boy in the ashram. 1 week later, she comes back and the boy has no taste for sweets. Mother is very happy with Guru. And she thanks him. Guru says, all right, I'm very happy that the boy has learned. So mother has one query. She says, my dear sir, let me ask you a question. Why did you need 2 weeks before you could see my son? And the Guru replied, when you came to me and asked me to cure your son of the addiction to sweets, I realized I needed 2 weeks to cure my addiction. When I cured my addiction to sweets, then I could easily transmit that knowledge to your son. And therefore he is also cured of the addiction. This, in a simple way, is the meaning of bona fide. What we speak, there must be practice. Otherwise, there is no potency. So this is how Rahugana could recognize the potency of Jalabalan. Because whatever he spoke, he was also believing. He had withdrawn his senses from the material world. He did not react. He did not counteract. He was perfectly poised in his equilibrium and devotion to Krishna. And therefore, the first thing he did was to now learn the truth by approaching Guru, and he inquired from him submissively. The second point that we must take is submission is there, and rendering of service to the great devotees must always be there. Service and submission, 2 S's. If you have service and submission to a bona fide Guru, our spiritual life is always safe and secure. Then when we ask questions, Guru becomes very pleased and all knowledge, transcendental knowledge can be revealed. And on the point of service, a very important episode in Chaitanya Charitamrita is very useful for us to understand the mood of service that we can cultivate when we approach great devotees. Govinda is the personal associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And one time after a very nice episode of Kirtan, Mahaprabhu became tired and the devotees gathered in Srivas Thakur's house. And there, Mahaprabhu lay down at the corridor. And he told Govinda to please come and give him massage on his feet. So Govinda then decides that he has to come and massage the feet of the Lord. But the Lord is lying down in such a way that he has to cross over the feet. Now we know in Vedic culture it is not proper for us to cross over the feet because the body is the temple of the good Lord and we should never transgress that etiquette. And what more, the transcendental body of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Govinda first asked Mahaprabhu, Lord, he was looking at the Lord and Lord said, you please come. And he was wondering whether the Lord would move. And so he actually requests the Lord in his heart that you please move so that I can come in because I have to massage your lotus feet. The Lord then says, do as you like. Do as you like. So Govinda then crosses over the Lord, a transgression, and then he starts massaging the lotus feet of the Lord. After a while, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, I'm very tired, I'm going to take some rest. You should go and have some prasadam. So Govinda says, all right. Some time later, Mahaprabhu wakes up. And when he wakes up, he looks around and he sees Govinda is seated exactly where he was. So Mahaprabhu says, Govinda, why have you not crossed over to have prasadam? And Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Govinda became silent. He did not say anything, but the Lord could understand his heart. And Prabhupada writes very nicely in the purport that Govinda was prepared to go to hell as long as his service to the Lord was unimpeded. But when he came to service to himself, to go and have prasadam to fill his stomach, he did not want to cross over the Lord. Because that service would not be for the pleasure of the Lord, but it would be for himself. A very subtle, very important point we should remember. Why are we doing service? The aim of service is to glorify Krishna and his devotees. If we have that mood in mind, then any activity that we do will always make us peaceful. Otherwise, because the consciousness is not right, it becomes service to our senses and not service to Rishikesh, who is the master of the senses. So these 2 points are very important as foundations for how we relate to the great devotees of the Lord, how we submit to Krishna. And the last point that I can take from this verse is actually the statement that Prabhupada takes. Therefore, Maharaj Raghugana concluded that it was appropriate to ask him, meaning Jalabharat, about Atma Tattva, the spiritual science. Tad vijnanartham sa gurum eva vikachet. Prabhupada writes, this Vedic injunction is also confirmed herein. If anyone is at all interested in knowing the spiritual science, Brahma Jignasa, he must approach a guru like Jalabharat. Notice the word must. Prabhupada never uses a word without significance. If we really scrutinizingly study the purports and the translations, every word of Prabhupada has never been used whimsically. If Prabhupada could have used may, he would have used may. But he has used the word must. And if you look at this Vedic injunction, and if you look at all the times Prabhupada has quoted this Vedic injunction, it simply means in order to understand transcendental science, one must approach a bona fide guru. This is what it means. And if you study this injunction in all the various places Prabhupada has spoken, in one particular purport, I think it is in 4th canto, 21st chapter, 31st verse. In that purport, Prabhupada quotes this verse again, and then he says that the word eva vigachet does not refer to may. It is actually must. Meaning, there is no option. That's what Prabhupada writes. There is no option. Meaning, if one wants spiritual success, one must approach and surrender to an exalted devotee of the Lord. Why? Because the great exalted devotees of the Lord, they are so exalted, they are as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if we want to understand that, we can understand it in the life of Srila Prabhupada. If you read Giriraj Maharaj's book, Watering the Seed, there is one episode that he describes wonderfully this point that Prabhupada describes. Prabhupada had gone to one of the, I think it was a judge, a retired judge in a congregation. I forget the country. Maybe it was India. And Prabhupada had gone there because the retired judge had invited Prabhupada and the disciples over for prasadam. So when they went there, the disciples had gone with Prabhupada, And there was also little Saraswati. I think we remember reading that little Saraswati was possibly the first poster child of ISKCON. And she was always seen dancing, and she was really very much pleasing to Prabhupada because she was the future of ISKCON. So Saraswati also tagged along. And the judge at the end of Prasad and everything gifted Prabhupada with a deity form of Krishna. So Prabhupada takes the deity form of Krishna in his hand, and Saraswati is excited because she's a little girl. So then what Prabhupada does is Prabhupada then gives it to Saraswati. And this exchange is being witnessed by the devotees. And at that point of time, Saraswati takes the deity of Krishna and she looks at it. Then she puts it down and says, child, the attraction and attention wavers, she moves around. Then Prabhupada takes the deity and he hides it behind. So Saraswati turns back to the table and there's no deity of Krishna. So she starts becoming anxious. Dhiraj Maharaj says that everybody around started to ask her questions like, Saraswati, where's Krishna? Where's Krishna? And when you have a toy and the toy is taken away, and when parents say, where's the toy, where's the toy? Actually it enhances the anxiety of the child. So the child Saraswati became very agitated because she was wondering, where's Krishna, where's Krishna? The devotees didn't help because they kept saying, where's Krishna, where's Krishna? And she couldn't understand where was Krishna. And then Dhiraj Maharaj writes, one devotee then said, he phrased the question differently. He said, Saraswati, who has Krishna? And the moment he said, who has Krishna? Saraswati's face lit up, she points at Srila Prabhupada and she says, Prabhupada has Krishna. And all the devotees laughed, and Dhiraj Maharaj writes saying that at that moment it seemed like a beautiful exchange between a pure devotee and a child. But he also felt that Prabhupada was teaching something much deeper. He wrote there that Prabhupada, he could understand that Srila Prabhupada is such a pure devotee that he is as good as God, because if Krishna wanted, he could reveal everything to him and he could then transmit it to the world. The other point Dhiraj Maharaj brought up that was very nice in that exchange is the great devotee of the Lord really has Krishna. He has Krishna. He has him in his hands. If you read 9.4.63 of Bhagavatam that we quoted yesterday, Krishna confirms this, saying that he is not independent of the devotees. He is always dependent on the devotees. That's the beautiful exchange between Krishna and the pure devotee. And Dhiraj Maharaj writes that he could see how wonderful it was. It just suddenly struck him that Prabhupada had Krishna with him. And if anyone surrendered to Prabhupada, Prabhupada could just give them Krishna. So the message is so nice from Bhagavatam that our devotion process is very simple. We should avoid these mental speculations which actually have no basis and which actually bring us agitation. To avoid mental speculation, we should follow and repeat what the great Acharyas have given us. This is the simplest thing that could be done. We just take the essence and assimilation of their consciousness, our spiritual masters, Srila Prabhupada, and all we have to do is repeat. Don't subtract, don't divide, don't add, don't minus. Just by repeating, even if we are possessed of inability, if we try our best to repeat to the best of our endeavors, that is our perfection of existence. That is the secure shelter that Rahugana is now asking Jadabarat. And that will be found in the verses that we learn. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
Jai.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Jai Gaura Premanande. Are there any realizations that devotees would like to share? Prabhu, please.
Prabhu, you mentioned Parasuram. So I'm wondering, because we know he was defeated by Visnu.
Yes.
And you mentioned he was incarnation of the Lord.
Yes.
So what kind of incarnation of the Lord is it, you know?
Parashuram is considered, of course, in normal terms, he is considered one of the 10 more prominent incarnations of the Lord that we see in Vedic culture. As far as I remember in the first canto, and as far as I remember reading the teachings of Lord Chaitanya,